Hello and welcome to episode 136 of The Imperial Truth. I'm Greg and it's just me for much of the show today. Unfortunately, we were going to grab Michael on, and I know I said a while ago we'll be doing Saturnine, but real life's happened in that respect. We will be doing it. We'll be doing it without Michael, unfortunately. So this episode got all delayed and everything else, and it's just me for a bit of it. But before we get into all of that, you can check out Element Games if you want to support the show and get all your plastic crack from them. That we've got Crucible of Retribution is currently up on pre-order if you want to go and get a rather awesome Adeptus Titanicus book. And the cards sold out, but we know what GW are like with them, bless them. But you can get a ton of other stuff from them as well, whether it's your glues, your basing materials, other game systems, board games, card games, RPG books, even the Essentials range they do. They do Artist Opus brushes, but they also do things like movement trays if you're playing a different system, or in case you are playing something like Militia and you need a way of moving your troops around the board a little bit quicker. They do measuring arcs and all kinds of things like that as well. So plenty of stuff there from Element, and some fantastic service with it as well. On top of that, we have Geek Shield. So if you have any form of a life insurance and you've had it for a while, or you just want to check on it, you can head over and drop Pete a message, and what he's really proud of doing, particularly with a few people, is getting them insurance that will actually work for them. On top of that, if you haven't got insurance and you are interested in some, then you can go and have a chat to him as well. Very chill, very good at what he does. It's not a nice subject to talk about. But it's one of those things that is, it's important when you need it, and maybe it's something we should all be thinking about a little bit. And thank you for those guys for sponsoring the show. If you do go and use them, do tell them. So with Element, you can go through our link on the show notes, and there's also don't forget to double up your crystals by putting in someone's crystal code before checkout, or just as you check out, should I say. If you want mine, it's GRE259. That can all be found in the show notes. And if you do go and talk to Pete, please tell them we sent you, so that he knows it's worthwhile what we're doing on here with his shout outs, and also the advert as well. So it's been a while since the last show. I do apologise for that. As I say, real life, once again, it feels like we've been saying that for about 8 months now, which we have. So real life's been getting in the way, and it's delayed a lot of things, and there's been a lot up in the air, I'm sure you can appreciate. To be honest, I can't really remember. I haven't kept notes of what's come out recently, but or let's say recently in the last while from Forge World. But we have got the companions out now, the Dark Angels companions. I understand why some people don't like these models. I think they're fantastic. They're slightly over the top, which I think is cool. I think even for people who don't like them, it's elements of them they don't like, whether it's the style of the painting in terms of the bone, or the over-the-top helmets, things like that, bits that can be changed. There's a lot of good stuff in there. They are, they're set pieces. You're buying what you can see at the end of the day, but that's not unusual with these guys. We've said it before, and I think some people will say it again, but I think the Dark Angels line as a whole is absolutely fantastic. And these guys just add into that, and they're pretty cool in game as well. So lots of cool stuff in that one kit, really. We've also had Luther go up for sale. What was it? Luther First of the Fallen. So no longer available. Obviously, it's a limited edition, and they do sell out quickly. Managed to snag mine, which is good for me, I suppose. This is in that that character set edition series, character series. Yeah, that'll be the best way of saying it. And it's set way after the Heresy. This is Luther trapped on Caliban, and some people interrogating him to find out some information and some claims of him feeling repentant for what's happened. So, looking forward to reading that. I think the size of those books can be really handy for telling the right kind of story without dragging it out, without bringing in too many other influences. It's long enough to get involved in a story, but as I say, sometimes on the other books you've got 2 or more strands going on, and it doesn't always feel like those strands necessarily need to be in the same place. But with a book that kind of size, it will be fairly focused, I would think, which is cool. I can imagine there's a bit of time in interrogation and then flashbacks to what he's talking about. That's a guess. We don't know yet, but that'll be with us at the end of the week. So getting my reading queue sorted, so once it drops I can just jump straight on it. And then for those who play Adeptus Titanicus, we don't talk too much about Adeptus Titanicus here because we have Full Stride. So for those who don't know, myself and Matt do the Full Stride podcast, which is dedicated Adeptus Titanicus once a month, and tend to leave it all there so that guys who aren't interested in it don't have it taking up half the show, and then people who are only interested in Adeptus Titanicus don't have to listen to the waffle on about 30k, because some people only do one or the other, believe it or not. But Crucible Retribution is out, available for order at the moment. Fantastic book. Lots more Legios, some more houses, lots. The big thing for me is the extra scenarios. I think they work. Well. From a brief overlook at them, what's really nice is they tell you roughly how much terrain to have on there, and then the maps themselves have terrain drawn on it. So it gives you an idea when they say moderate urban terrain, then you get a vague idea of what they mean by moderate urban terrain, and when they say sparse natural terrain, like, you get an idea of what they mean by sparse as well. So yeah, it's quite a nice little thing, and then lots of little bits of rules that can be borrowed and things like that. And I'm hoping the open play cards, which unfortunately did sell out very, very quickly, although if you do know an independent, particularly the smaller independents, if they do get stuff like this in, sometimes it can sit on their shelves for a while. So it's worth checking out your local friendly gaming store, even if you don't really go there. I don't really have a friendly local gaming store. I have a couple that are a little drive away, and they are useful sometimes for those little bits and pieces that aren't necessarily easy to get hold of. But it's that balance of they're quite a small shop, so they won't get everything in. So, but it can be useful every now and then, and certainly worth a check. Then slightly away from what GW are doing themselves, Audible. For those who listen to audio books, Audible do fairly regular 3-for-2 sales. They also do a book of the day thing, and quite often there is some heresy content on there, or not. If not heresy content, some Black Library content. But there is often, I think, with something like Fulgrim's out at the moment. It's like £2 something to buy the whole book. So if you do like audio books, then Audible's really good anyway. For a set fee, you're getting a book a month effectively, and there are other ways of doing that as well, but they then let you into these offers that are going on as well. And I can't, in general, I think the narrators they've got for most of the Games Workshop stuff, most of the Black Library stuff, is pretty good. There are some tales of woe with certain ones, but the big names that we generally get in terms of Jonathan Keeble and that are very good at what they do. So Audible's always a good shout. Go and check there. And if you're interested in that kind of thing as well, there's like the Black Library unofficial group on Facebook. Someone will generally post up on there when an offer's on, or a release has come out that people are waiting for. It's a good place to be for your Black Library information. That page are generally quite good on there. But because it's myself, just on the intro here, I'm going to cut this short and we can get into a bit more of the meat of the episode. Well, it's been a few weeks now since Book 9, Crusade, has dropped, and most of the other podcasts have done their kind of army review kind of things. Lots of people jumping straight into all the Dark Angels rules, which is cool. I was going to think about doing something similar, but there's so much content out there right now about their rules and the Night Lord's rules that I'm going to leave that for a little bit. What we're going to do is hopefully get some people who've played a few games with it, that kind of thing, and go through and sort that out. I have heard less people talking about the lore and the campaign side of things, and the campaign something I haven't looked at a huge amount yet. Just had a brief look over, but these books, we buy them, we spend a considerable amount of money, partly because we want the rules straight away, but partly because there's a wealth of information in here. And this book probably had a bit more expectation, or a bit more kind of a less leeway in that respect, because of the fact it's a bit shorter than the other books, and a few other little bits and pieces, but there's a lot of pressure on it to deliver in that aspect, and I think they've done fairly well. I think the Thramas Crusade is something we've only heard little bits about. We talked about this on the show a little while ago when someone was asking like how to get the background of it. I mean, essentially we've got a number of short stories. The maps in their show kind of enlightened me a little bit to exactly where they were fighting. It's easy to forget sometimes exactly where each Primarch's homeworld is and things like that, and the nature of how the Night Lords were kind of influential in that area was something that I didn't really think about before reading much up on the book. I also think it's a bit tricky in that we have a fight. They've got to fill this book up with one campaign that takes place over a very wide area, and it's not one set piece like Prospero was, so you can really dive into Prospero because it's one planet essentially. Yeah, you've got the build up and the fleet being sent out, and a few of the feelings between people on the fleet and something like that, but you can really break down Prospero as a single campaign. And a little bit with the White Scars and with the Blood Angels as well, actually, in a little bit like that. And Calth, they're very although they're not all set on one planet, they're very focused in that respect. I mean, the Thramas Crusade takes place in a wide area of space. They just call it the Thramas Crusade because that's one of the key places. But actually, it's a much wider zone of engagement than that as well. So it has its own challenges in that respect, in that you're picking out aspects of that, but it's a best part of a 3-year war with many planets and 2 legions that are fighting across that. They write a little bit about the times they're brought together, but it's not quite as focused because of the nature of that, and I think that makes it a bit trickier to. But anyway, because this is all out there now, you can go and find this information. I thought it might be an idea to cover it, so hopefully this is interesting for some of you at least. But yeah, we'll go through a little bit of the Thramas Crusade. I was content in the dark places of the galaxy, content to kill in the name of the Empire and be forgotten. But you have summoned me back with your pitiful flailings at rebellion, for you have endangered the Empire my toil has built, and for that there is a price to be paid. First we shall speak of my brothers, Curse and Horus, and then you shall learn what terror truly means for the brief remnants of your existence. Just one of the better little calling outs that's written in the book. I do think when the Lion speaks and when Curse speaks actually as well, they have taken aspects of what's been written on Black Library and made some really cool stuff to read or indeed listen to. But yeah, as I mentioned right at the start, the Thramas Crusade, it takes us right back to the early stages of the heresy. Horus knew, and this is one of the bugbears. Yeah, everyone jokes about the the Lion's loyalty, the Dark Angel's loyalty, because of the Fallen. But the Lion was always loyal. The Dark Angels were loyal to a greater extent. There were issues there, much like other legions had issues. But as a Space Wolves fan, you can't. Even then, you can't really question the Lion's loyalty. Loyalty has its own price, obviously. Loyalty has its own reward, should I say. So it takes us right back then. Horus knew the Lion would not waver with his loyalty, and as such he sent him beyond the borders of the Empire, which we don't really know a huge amount about. We've got little bits from the books, but there's not a huge amount of information there. But even then, news travels fast, and he returns. But before that, the Night Lords... it's interesting that the Night Lords had fought in much of this region before, and where they weren't particularly popular, they didn't get the best of stuff. They didn't get maybe as much love and attention in the Crusade as some of the other legions did. They found their own ways of making up for that. Here they were taking tithes in exchange for saving worlds that should have been cleansed, and they allowed these worlds to live in exchange for a tithe, whether that be people or weapons or what have you. And then when they've come back to some of these worlds within this crusade under Horus's orders to take them for material and to help the war effort, a lot of these worlds remember what the Night Lords are like and don't really put up much of a fight. They know what's coming, and they know they probably can't fight it. And Horus wanted these worlds, as I say, for people, but also there's a lot of material here. As I say, the Forge worlds involved in, and we're talking about Thramas. The Thramas Crusade covers a large area, as I say, more than just the Thramas sector. It's like most of that eastern fringe. But within that, we have these 3 Forge worlds, which make up the triplex, and there's a lot of power there as well. So if Horus gets all this, then he's got he's going to be, even with the way the Night Lords are going about it, because Curse takes a back seat and kind of lets them run free for a while. Even with the way they're going about it, he's going to be getting a vast boost to his war machine. And this is all boosted as well because some of these Forge worlds, and particularly so Triplex, they've already had an internal battle within the 3 forges, and it turns out that some of them are less than keen to follow the Emperor's edicts on prohibited technologies. So they are, they were showing signs of fighting with Horus before even needing to be asked, to be fair. But eventually we do get some. Thramas itself resists, along with the Forge world of Golgorad, and it's at that moment where things start to change within the system. Golgorad comes out fighting, and to be the first real power to do so. And Thramas, when they're faced with an envoy right into their, into their heart of their leadership, they tell the Night Lords no, and they will fight. And this stand, inspires others to join them as well. And what we get within Thramas is the first stalemate, and there are a few stalemates within periods of stalemate, should I say, within Thramas. And this is the first one. They stand up to the Night Lords, and because we're talking about such a vast area, it's really hard for them to. It's hard for any one side to control with enough resources to be able to resist any attempt to take a planet, but also then to be on the offensive. And this is the first of those instances. And each time those instances happen, something comes along to break that deadlock. And usually it's a Primarch, and this time it's Night Haunter, who, as I say, has been sat back. But now he wants his fun, and he's out there to kill and rampage and torture and do all the things the Night Haunter does. He is, even at this point, he's a broken person who, as we know him, there's humanity is sliding away. He's facing his demons in terms of his visions of how he's going to die, and he's not happy about that, and so he sets out to kind of with the wanton abandon of hoping it may change, but knowing if it doesn't, he's just going to do whatever anyway. And things end up looking really bleak, obviously for the loyalists that are here. The Night Haunter, adding the military capacity, thinking capacity of a Primarch into this is enough just by that in itself to change how things are going on, to then put the Primarch on the battlefield as well. But just as things are getting bleakest, the Lion arrives. As I say, word had got out to him that there was this rebellion, and he comes with a small but powerful fleet to investigate for himself. And where he turns up, hoping to get reinforcements in terms of or to get fueled and resupply, should I say, he finds a world that is flying the banner of Horus. And this is the story of Diamat that we get in the whichever book it is, Descent of Angels, Fallen Angels, or Descent of Angels, I think. And he liberates Diamat and meets his old pal Perturabo right at the end of it. And this is where we see just how out of the loop the Lion is. In Perturabo tells him about the Dropsite Massacre, but obviously playing his part differently, and convinces the Lion that he is on his side, and kind of tells him to keep fighting. And part of Horus's plans here now are, for the Dark Angels, is to keep them out of the fight. And the one thing the Night Lords do for quite a while is keep the Dark Angels out of the fight. But just before Perturabo leaves, then the Lion hands over these new type of Ordinatus machines, which have been on Diamat, that have been built ready for the War Master's armies. And unwittingly and unfortunately, and it will gnaw at, it's the kind of thing that would annoy and gnaw at the Lion, even though he is pragmatic and will say at the time, if it wasn't necessarily the wrong thing to do, but he gives these machines over to Horus anyway. And Perturabo, who of course will use them better than most. And then after Diamat, he heads to Triplex. The Lion's brilliant in what he does. This is talked about a number of times over the books as a war leader. Potentially he's the best. Horus had the whole package. That's what we hear about all the time. But people say Sanguinius could have led as the face, and the Lion. Everyone respects the Lion in terms of his ability to persecute a war. And he heads to the Triplex to gather the power that he will need to fight this campaign. And it's here that we really get the let me remember, Galatia is the forge world that he goes to, and the full kind of degenerate machinery that has been collected there is unleashed upon the Dark Angels, and it takes the Lion himself to come and help out and secure the victory there. I'm not going to get too much into the details of these. I think you should go read them. But we go from there onto Phal as one of the other Triplex, and they're pragmatic, and they see what's happened. They know what's going on, and the ones there who are more worried about their own skin are quite happy to surrender to take out their other guys and just say, nope, we're gonna make sure we survive here. And the Lion is pragmatic as well enough to know that he needs them, and so he then has seats of power to launch his to make his decision about what he does next. And he has those two decisions. He can go to Terra and try and fight Horus directly, or he can stay here. If he goes to Terra, he realizes that if Horus has headed straight to Terra, then he will be too late. There's nothing he can do. He can turn up after the event and try and fight, but that doesn't do a great deal. Or he can prosecute a war here, and he can fight for the Empire rather than the Emperor, try and save that. And being the pragmatist, this is probably the best course of action given the information he's got, and so he chooses to stay and fight the Night Lords here. But once again, we get to a point where the Dark Angels now are gathering more and more their forces have come back from outside the Eastern Fringe, and they have taken enough worlds that they once again reach that point where if they push for one big offensive or multiple decent-sized offensives, then they're going to leave themselves over to counterattack. And the Night Lords are in the same position there. They're spread so thin that any real attempt to force a breakthrough would leave one or a number of other planets susceptible to being taken. So we head once more into this stalemate, and this is why this war takes like 3 years. What breaks it this time is the Midnight Treaties. These pacts the Night Lords have made with these various planets are called on, and we get things like heavily modified Ogrins and weird, crazy genetic alterations to other troops and things like that, but also 3,000 White Scars who have obviously been out of the loop, and when they arrive and talk to Night Lords, the Night Lords say, okay, well, we're fighting here, and there are some, there's some Dark Angels in there doing some bad things. Horus has, they've rebelled, and not explained about the Horus turning, but explain they're working. Horus has sent them here to fight against them, and the White Scars, as we know, have got a really good, strong link with the Sons of Horus, and just having that kind of weight that his name carries, they join forces with the Night Lords, and this allows a large push to happen. Again, this is what I like about these. The way they write these is it's grand tactical overview, and you can almost picture it playing out in your head like the old war films where they're moving pieces around. And they take worlds, and the White Scars, still a little bit unsure about how the Night Lords, even more probably unsure about how the Night Lords are reacting. They've the freedom they've gained from following Horus, and even then the freedom they've gained from not being looked over, having someone looking over their shoulder. They degenerated even more, and they do end up the White Scars do end up allowing some of the Dark Angels to retreat from a battle as they fight to allow a withdrawal of their own forces. And later on, when they pick up some captives, they hold them. Even though the Night Lords, they're starting to feel the Night Lords' actions are a little bit out of kilter, and compared to what they're telling you, with the Dark Angels being respectful of kind of those moments in war where, as I say, they've allowed each other to retreat from a field, that kind of thing. The Dark Angels have acted in a manner with honour, whereas the Night Lords definitely aren't. And once they capture some Dark Angels and keep them on their ships, because then they're not letting the Night Lords tear them to pieces, it's bad news for the Night Lords. And it comes to a head on the world of Crucible. And this is the first time that we actually see Kurz and the Lion on the same battlefield. Kurz here is desperate to get and has been all along desperate to get the Lion into combat with the Lion. He wants to prove himself. He wants to cause as much pain as possible, but also he knows that if he loses and he dies, then he's beaten this fate that has been he feels that has been set upon him. So he has no problem kind of going in. It's almost a no-lose situation for him. But the Lion's too canny for that and draws him away from the main bulk of his forces, and then occupies him with the automata they have, and knowing that Kurz will beat them, but it will take enough time. And at that point, as the Night Lords are really pushing, he leads a sortie out into the heart of the Night Lords himself. And as Kurz is fighting to free himself and to kill these automata, the Lion is killing quite a few heads and important kind of HQs within the Night Lords Legion, causing them to turn and starting to waver the Night Lords line with much less forces. And again, we reach that point of balance. There was a number of times here where everything could have gone the other way. A number of, as we say, we've had these stalemates through the fight, through the campaign, but we also have stalemates through the fights as well. And this point reaches that point of balance where, not necessarily stalemate, but where something needs to happen to change, to give the advantage one way or the other. And here it's the White Scars who've held back up to this point, and their ship moves forwards and the Night Lords make way and they launch their drop pods and all the White Scars down onto the planet. But it's not just the White Scars. They've also got those Dark Angels captives with them. This is a really sweet moment, the kind of thing you can imagine, the kind of thing I would base an army on, I think. And out of these drop pods together come White Scars and Dark Angels, and they turn on the Night Lords. And the cumulative effect of the mental side of thinking. Yeah, well, it's a sort of reverse massacre, isn't it? Drop site massacre. The cumulative effect of thinking that your allies are coming to then have them turn on you, plus the fact that you've just dropped an extra few thousand, troops into one side, turns that fight completely. And the Dark Angels, they might be honourable, but they also are remorseless when they choose a course of action, much like the Lion. They will pay that price. They will once they're set in their course of their action, as I say, they will go quite far with it, and basically not many Night Lords escape from that. And this is the big blow that will allow the Dark Angels to take a bit more of a front foot. In fact, the Night Lords really consolidate. They stop trying to hold too many of the worlds they're on. They start trying to deny resources to their enemy, and when the Dark Angels appear on a planet, they go to ground. They fight the guerrilla warfare designed to slow them down. Mainly, I think, to save their own skins. It's talked about a lot. They're not going to throw themselves away as a grand sacrifice, or not many of them are. But this also helps Horus's plans. The longer the Dark Angels are here fighting, the less impact they're going to have across the galaxy, and that's what he wants. I don't necessarily they do it for those reasons, but it works to those reasons. And it's during this time we get the next kind of big set piece, which is the confrontation at Thramas. Thramas itself has been targeted by the Faceless Prince, and he's called in the Ulan Hudo, which is a Forge World moon, which has actually been given the ability to move, and it can move through the warp as well. The Mechanicum on that planet have done some crazy stuff with it, and it's become this kind of basically a Death Star, and it's been called into the Thramas system itself and slowly worked its way through the system, destroying orbital stations and planets and everything else. And it's almost at Thramas, ready to destroy it when the Lion arrives leading 1,000 Deathwing and the whole White Scars contingent in a direct assault on the moon itself. So it's one of those classic, all the spaceships flying towards, just trying to batter a hole so that the main ships can go and unleash their cargo, which when it's Space Marines is not insignificant at all. We have Cosplaying in charge of the fleet, fighting this fleet battle with the Faceless Prince. Anytime Cosplaying's involved, it's just cool. He's just that kind of guy. And we have the Lion trying to fight his way through, say, with these Deathwing on the moon forge itself, whatever you want to call it, against the Witch of Thramas. There's lots of little bits thrown in here. I can see with the next book coming out, when we do get the Dark Mechanicum, I really want to see some of this stuff expanded on, actually. It would be cool to have a section on the Witch of Thramas. But she's controlling, they're sending in thousands and thousands of automata, and it's that classic kind of wading through fight. And the White Scars are there. They're fighting to expunge their honour. They don't care if they die, just as long as they make up for the fact that they fought for the wrong side. And they initially are there to hold the escape route, but they discover that there's these warp engines that aren't too far, warp generators, just generators, can't quite remember, that are not too far from their position. And as as the fight is taking a long time, and the longer it takes, the worse for the Dark Angels. They basically voice down that, you worry about getting yourself off, we've got this. And just, as always, it's almost just in time. The Lion does end up striking down the witch before escaping. And the white scars do detonate, causing a chain detonation, all the classic tropes there that end up destroying this moon forge. But the destruction of the moon forge itself, it's so close to Thramas that ends up debris falling for months afterwards. And the Thramas system and Thramas the planet are just decimated. They're just absolutely smashed to pieces, to the point where the people living there are questioning whether the cure was worth it. Was the cure worse than the disease itself? Obviously, in the wider context of the war, no. But for those people living there, does it matter who you're, who's killing you if you're dying? And that's happening across the whole planet. So all this while, the Dark Angels are taking ground slowly. They're on the upper foot. The Night Lords don't really seem to have a way to kind of come out and finish this cleanly. And the Night Haunter he's desperate now. I say he hasn't really followed Horus's plans for a while, but now he just wants to face Johnson. And it was also a way to win, but if he dies, as we said, he could die. So he invites him to his fort. He's building this fortress on Seguelsa. I don't quite know how to pronounce that. The lowest advantage they've got in the fight is not great enough for them to ignore this. They are slowly gaining ground, but at some point they're possibly going to reach that stalemate again. So the Lion takes the bait. He knows it's potentially going to be a trap, and he sets himself out to try and counter that. He's taking a small company with him. He's taking the fastest ships. He's leaving the Invincible Reason back to head into this trap. And he descends to the planet, and they go at it one-on-one in the most kind of honourable setting that you could think Kurz would do at this kind of time. But Kurz is baiting Johnson the whole time. He's trying to get him to lose his calm demeanour. He's trying to just gain that edge by telling him that he's just as bad, and this is where we get the savage weapons lines and all that. And Johnson is the first to strike, and very quickly it becomes Night Lords versus Dark Angels. Like, no one stands by while it's going on. And it doesn't last long. The Night Haunter it ends with the Night Haunter being dragged back, beaten and bloodied, while his sons take him out of the way. And in order to get him out alive, a whole company throw themselves at the Lion to buy time. He destroys them all, but he gets away, and then the Dark Angels make their escape as well. But this didn't work, and the Night Lords get more desperate, and with Kurz, incapacitated, they really fall onto their most debased nature. Now they are scorching the earth. They are just going in and killing and destroying and blowing stuff up, and there's no thought of looking to the future and how they're going to fight. They just want to cause as much damage as possible. And in retaliation for this, because the one thing within this is, with the Ruinstorm going on and everything else, this whole campaign is very isolated, so they've only got so much in terms of munitions, and they're not getting resupplied very easily. And where Forge Worlds have fallen and fighting, it's all being slowed down as well. And there's blockades around Forge Worlds. Each side, where it can, is trying to stop the other side getting munitions and supplies and everything else. And the Night Lords quite often are making these raids and trying to grab supplies where possible and get away. The Dark Angels take to just destroying everything, to give the Night Lords no respite, no resources. So they're withdrawing in from worlds they know they can't hold. They're withdrawing from them and destroying everything of use as they go. Again, we kind of come back to that at the end, but it's desperate stuff. But at this point, the Lion's suddenly drawn away from the fight, and he's taking 30,000 troops with him. And that is the story of the Lion. the short story. I can't remember which book it's in, but we know what happens in that if you've read that. And this is again another twisting point where the Night Lords now, the pressure's been let off them and they start to come out and attack. And the Faceless Prince is back at Thramas because that's all he cares about, is that he's been slighted and he's going to try and take it. And finally, for the Dark Angels, this is a place where a number of Night Lords have gathered to be attacked. So the reply from the Dark Angels is swift, and the Faceless Prince is on, and he's taking his time. He is not going to let Thramas die quickly. He is on the ground, slowly tearing it apart, killing everything on it. And when the Dark Angels turn up, it's Madrak Cedras turns up. He knows that there's an easy way to go about doing this, and so he does bombard the planet. He's Phosphex and lances first, and then head to the ground and clear them out, which he does, and he kills the Faceless Prince himself. But again, like, Thramas has come off no better than this. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, it was a good victory, but it wasn't the decisive victory that could then swing the tide back. That, once again, was when the Lion returned. But this time he's returned with a way to bypass the warp storms and a plan to finish this once and for all. They go and destroy Night Lord's fleets as much as possible, scattering them, really just forcing them back to a point where they're going to become harder to get hold of. But the genius is, his next step is to then draw them out in one, make them desperate, and then draw them out in one fell swoop. So the second step is to inform the Lords of Golgorad, the Forge world, of the location of their hated foe, Legio Victorum, knowing that they wouldn't be able to resist heading there in full force. And to the Night Lords, this would seem like the kind of mistake that they could capitalise on, where they've been drawn out for their hatred, and so the Night Lords can then go and attack Golgorad without the fear of being bogged down and losing too many. They could go in and cause some real damage here. But that's all part of the plan, and the Dark Angels... Well, so the Night Lord fleet is some 200 capital ships and 3 times that number of smaller ships. The Dark Angels fleet is 300 capital ships and twice that number of smaller vessels. But the beauty is, with their new way of travelling through the warp, they can arrive without having to send scouts in and come in piecemeal on the edge of a Mandeville point. They can just translate, in tight formation right on top of their enemy, which they do. And it's not really a fight. It's a massacre, frankly. It's a slaughter. The Dark Angels are able not only to break the Night Lord fleets, but to cripple a great number of ships so that they can then be used later on within the war. Some Night Lord ships do escape, but they are broken as a force. Lots of troops still stuck on planet as well. And that got absolutely bloody, with the Night Haunter again only worried about trying to find Johnson. But the Lion does drop down, and they did meet. And again, the Night Haunter's broken and bloody. You think he'd have learned his lesson by now, but maybe he is just hoping for that death, that release that he's after. But once again, he's dragged away with, being another company of Legionnaires just throwing themselves in the way to try and save the guy. The Night Lords... Like, some of their Legion really do not care, but it's amazing the rest of their Legion do still have that respect for the Night Lord, that kind of begrudging kind of love for a dad that's no good for them kind of thing, which is, part of their Legion story, I suppose. But even in space, as they're trying to get out of the Dark Angel's trap, they can only do so by a gap being made in the Dark Angel's fleet by a warp core destination to stop the Dark Angels taking a ship, destroying enough kind of a sphere of space to be able to then fly through. And even then, a couple more ships standing their ground, defiantly firing up till the very last second as they get destroyed to allow their Primarch to escape. And it seemed to them that they might get away. Sevatar just about managing to keep the Legion together as a Legion to stop it breaking up completely into their own individual packs. But no sooner has he done so than the Dark Angels are on them again, and it's really looking bleak. And the Night Haunter suddenly comes around. He comes back to his senses, and his attitude hasn't changed. His instruction is to board the Invincible Reason. And from there, we get the stories where we know about Night Haunter. The Black Library covers it, but that's essentially the end of the Thramas system. At that point, the Night Lords are now scattered, and they don't have enough cohesion. They don't have anyone there, with everyone kind of important enough on board the Invincible Reason. They don't have enough charisma and respect and maybe brutality in any one single person combination to hold them together. And so as a Legion, they never really exist again. There are these roaming packs. But the Crusade is won, in inverted commas, by the Lion. Maybe no other Primarch would have taken the actions of the Lion. He was willing to bear the costs for that victory. So for 3 years, the Crusade ran. And it left a huge toll in dead worlds. And he would do it all again. Absolutely, there's no doubt the Lion would do it all again. The ends justified the means to him. But Kurz's words are there to haunt him, and they will weigh heavy on his mind. We are savage weapons, one and all, too dangerous to be wielded without cost. That is all history will see of us, even you, Lion, even you. But I will read the final passage of the book that deals with the Crusade. For Thramas and its broken worlds he could do nothing. Remorse of any kind was akin to foolishness to the Lion. He had been ruined in the cause of the Imperium, yet one more sacrifice offered up for the future the Emperor had promised to his sons, and it was of no further value in the war against Horus. So the Lion left, neither in triumph nor defeat, but with a fragile sense of pride that once again the First Legion had stormed into the jaws of hell and emerged bloodied but unbroken. If this rebellion was to be the final test of his resolve, he would meet it head on, and he would prove himself better than those of his brothers that had fallen to their own selfish needs and hatreds. By his hand would the Imperium be saved, and he would tolerate none that sought to see it ended, for the sake of his own sacrifices and the duty that had been given him by the Emperor himself. From broken Thramas the Lion turned his ships, not towards distant Terra, still shrouded in warp storms, but towards Ultramar and his brother Guilliman. For dire rumours had reached him from Tigris. They spoke of destruction and death, of the treachery of the World Eaters and Word-bearers, and of a new banner raised amongst the ruins of his Imperium. One rebel had already risen and would fall at the Lion's hand, and if another had dared to rise, they would meet the same fate. The Dark Angels departed Thramas in full battle order, guns readied and blades sharp. They set their courses by a new beacon and to a singular destination, to Imperium Secundus. I think that section really sums up the Lion, and he has his views on what he is and what he should do, and he is unwavering in those, and this is where that loyalty is its own reward. He will do what needs to be done. In fact, you can see a little bit here why he and the Lion maybe rubbed up the wrong way against each other a little bit, because they will both take the path that needs to be trod, and the Lion, his job right from the start was set out to do that. He uses tools that none others are allowed to use, and that in itself then breeds that element of self-righteousness, I suppose. If he has the say when to unleash technologies that are now banned from the Imperium, then he's going to believe he has the right to be able to judge others on their actions as well. I really like, as I said right at the start, I really like this write-up. I think there is a lot more information on the worlds around Thramas. So if you are going to play the campaign, they will help out. If you're going to set your army within that system somewhere, then they might help out as well. Reading it, I have no intention of doing Dark Angels, and no intention to, well, actually no, there is an element of me that would love to do White Scars, but the instance where the White Scars turn and join the Dark Angels dropping out of drop pods, I think is just one of those sweet moments that I could easily see a Shattered Legion's force of those two working together. I think it would be pretty special. And when we come to these big black books, they take a long time to come out, and we're always kind of critical when they're not exactly what we want and what have you. But I think the writing in here is really good. As I say, right at the start, there are challenges in this story that don't necessarily appear in some of the other stories. When you look at, in fact, almost all the books, I don't think they're quite as wide as this one. And I think there's a good job done. And sometimes you might miss elements of the nitty-gritty, that getting in tight, focused action, but then you have the exemplary battles from the actual Legion section of the books to go and read as well. So there's plenty to offer there, and and hopefully we're going to look at the Crusade, the campaign system as well at some point, and we will look at the legions, and also I want to get a good look at some of the options involved. The two new generic units are really interesting, I think. But we'll leave that there. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully it wasn't too dry. I understand there is an element of that, and it might appear. And if you felt so, then no hard feelings from me. But I sometimes feel that those aspects of the book get overlooked. There's way more than I talked about here for 30 odd minutes or whatever it was. It's so much deeper than that. But I think it's nice to have a little look at the grounding of where we are with those settings that get talked about so much, but the details of which don't always get talked about. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there and we'll take a break.
What's a Geek Shield? Is it like a Breacher Shield?
Not exactly. Geek Shield is an insurance service giving you hobby rewards along the way. We appreciate that life insurance is a bore, so we wanted to make things a little more exciting with rewards that matter to you. Cool, right?
Okay, so why life insurance? I have Feel No Pain. Isn't that enough?
Very different thing. Life insurance can be used to settle off your mortgage, help with raising your children, or cover your funeral costs. It's never going to save you, but it will save your loved ones from financial disaster. Here's what some of our customers have to say.
Pete really will give his all to try and find a better policy for cheaper and give you vouchers. Why would you not do it?
It's great to know I have security for my family. Of that, I am certain.
Thanks to Geek Shield, my wife now questions if I'm still worth more alive.
Thanks to Geek Shield, I get to murder my family in the name of the Dark Gods and get all the money.
Yeah. So head over to geekshield.co.uk to book your free consultation today. Terms and conditions apply. Geek Shield is not a physical shield, nor will it save you from the Primordial Annihilator.
Well, I'm glad to say I've been joined by Frankie on the show, or nerd_princess. How you doing?
Hiya. Lovely to see you.
And you. You are, first, a little bit about you. You Instagram a lot, don't you? Hobby and other bits.
Yeah, so I'm mostly active on Instagram, although I am on a couple of other places, but mainly in the Warhammer community, so doing miniature painting and also Warhammer cosplay.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to go, I'll put the links in the show notes if you want to go and link over. But you do a few stories, a few things to camera, and then also you're involved not just through the cosplay, but through the Warhammer as well, in a few other kind of chats with other people and some cross-platforming.
Yeah, so I've started doing more like live streams and chats and interviews with different hobbyists. It actually started when we did our Warhammer community weekend online to replace Warhammer Fest, and then I got pretty hooked from there.
Yeah, it's if you're the kind of person that enjoys it, it can be quite it's just another addictive thing to do in this hobby. It's easy to fall into. So let's start. So we know you like Warhammer. How did that all start?
I mean, to be honest, I can't remember not playing Warhammer. I've been playing since I was about 10 years old.
Sure.
So like a good 21 years now. So I don't actually remember life before Warhammer, really.
I'm similar, just a bit older. Mine was about 11 when I got into it as well. So do you remember how you got introduced to it?
I don't remember, but I know from family history that my brother brought home a Space Marine from school one day, and at that point 4 of us were addicted forever.
Oh, wow. Cool. That's the way to do it, I suppose. Is that siblings that you got to play with?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we had some friends as well who played.
Oh, awesome. So, and how was that at home? Trying to play games against each other.
Absolute chaos. And because between the 4 of us there was a good 6-year age gap, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're kind of 10 and then the youngest is 4, that's quite a big age range. So the younger one, bless him, was always like in the early years trying to keep up.
Sure, yeah.
And be doing the same. But he's actually an excellent painter now. Obviously he's an adult. So no longer a kid.
But do you still remind him of those times when he was really young?
Oh, he doesn't need reminding.
Oh, okay.
He brings it up. It's like, and you guys were so mean to me because we never let him win.
Right.
We would just slaughter him every single time and be like, yeah, we're clearly better at Warhammer than you, when actually he was 6. So
it still counts.
Yeah, he's still chip on his shoulder about that one.
Still a win, a mark in the win column.
Yep.
So it all counts. That's cool. And so, were there any other times you walked away from Warhammer, or has it always been an interest?
Oh, I've had a long break. So I played up until, like most people, or like a lot of us, played up until kind of uni age, and then life happened.
Sure, yeah.
And I took a whole bunch of time off, which was quite a long time. It's about 8 years, from about 09 to 17. That was 2009, not 9 years old. Yes, and then came back into it when I just decided I was actually needing to treat workaholism and really needed a hobby. Right. And so I thought, what better thing than to go back to miniature painting, because, I knew I loved it.
Okay, that's cool. And that works for you, that kind of separate and go into your hobby bubble.
Yeah, although now I do it as a job, so I've kind of messed that one up. And now my hobby is gardening instead, because again, I need to make sure I'm doing something different. Sure,
yeah, and I think that's important. That it's easy from people on the outside looking at people who work within the hobby in a whole myriad of ways that it can become all-consuming.
Yeah, easily so. When it's something that you really enjoy, and especially for creative things, I think you need to make sure you have time away, because that's what keeps you fresh and means that you actually have that space. Because, when you're creating ideas, you actually need space where you're not engaged in that activity, just have it all kind of mulling over. I call it soup, that you put the ideas in your brain soup and then you have to kind of wait for them to stew. Sure. And then they pop back out later.
Yeah, I mean, there's many artists and writers and whoever who say they have their best ideas and their most intuitive, innovative thought processes when they're away from what they should be, when they, in inverted commas, should be being creative. Yeah,
it's the 4 a.m. or it's in the bath or on the loo or whatever.
Okay, that's cool. So, do you have any Warhammer staples? What are your armies?
At the moment, my main army is Death Guard, which is what I started with when I came back to the hobby. And I've been painting them for about 3 years and have a tiny army. I'm very slow.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, I wasn't going to start a new army, but then Indomitus came out, and now somehow I have a Necron army. Although I say army, it's currently 3 models are painted, so it's more of an idea of an army.
That's cool. And yeah, 40k is your game, is it?
At the moment, yeah. When I used to play, I actually used to be a fantasy player originally. I mean, I did 40k as well. I did pretty much everything across the years, but like all of us. But really, I would have said predominantly my thing was fantasy. Whereas when I came back, I wanted something different. So yeah, I was actually High Elves and switched to Nurgle just because they're pretty much as different to paint as you can get.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would have gone back to fantasy, but it didn't exist anymore.
Sure.
So,
well, in a few years' time, it might be back with us with the old world. So that's exciting for a lot of us old timers, particularly. Who love their old models. Although the thought of having to buy more armies is it's never quite as welcoming. But
the buying is not so much the problem as the painting.
Yeah, it's having the time to get it all done.
Yeah,
it's eternal problems, particularly if you are slow, and I am slow as well.
Yeah, I'm so slow, and I was really expecting. I always had this idea that if I, ever had this as a job, then somehow I would have an abundance of painted armies. But actually, nope, I'm still slow.
Yeah, I know a few commission painters are in exactly the same position.
Mm-hmm. Well, commission painters, they're always painting other people's stuff, aren't they? So it's
it's a tough call to fit in their own. They feel like they're cheating.
Yeah.
So Warhammer nerd for life. Cosplaying. When did that start for you?
Bit later, a few years later. So originally there was Games Day, which is now Warhammer Fest. So anyone who's more recently into it, that's what you'll know it as. It's a big convention if people haven't heard of it, which is all about Warhammer. And that used to have very little cosplay at it, actually, originally. I started going around 2000, maybe 2001. Right. And there really weren't a huge number of cosplayers, and there weren't the kind of huge cosplays that you get now, like the stilted Space Marines and that kind of thing. It was quite early days, really. But I remember just being so blown away the first time I saw, people actually bringing these characters to life. And I was always a kid that loved dress up anyway, so it was a very natural progression to kind of see these people and just be like, oh my God, I want to do that. So I started going to Games Day I wouldn't even call them costumes, kind of like themed clothes, really.
Yeah.
So like I did a wood elf and it was just kind of like, green and brown clothes, and it had, I think, literally 3 leaves on it. And that was the whole costume. And that was where I really started. Until then, for Games Day 2009, I built my first proper cosplay, which was my Sister of Battle armour.
That was your first proper...
Yeah, that was the first proper thing I built, really, of any costume. Other than that, it was just sort of putting stuff together seaming outfits and like combining bits and pieces rather than scratch building. That was the first thing I scratch built with a friend who did absolutely loads of it with me. It was very much a team effort. We spent about 3 months because we had summer holidays. So can you imagine as an adult having summer holidays? Wild.
Yeah, absolutely. The time I could waste all over again.
Yeah. So we spent literally 3 months, and it cost almost nothing. It cost probably about 50 quid for the entire lot, because so much of it's built out of rubbish, just random stuff from the house. It's got everything from a hose, like garden hose, to flower pots and cereal boxes and all sorts in it. And then it's all paper mache, including like the skull on the front is actually just sculpted out of paper mache. Right. It's not how cosplay is made now, or properly at all. And it's not how I would build stuff now, but it worked surprisingly well given what we made it out of.
Have you updated that since?
I have, but only in a very surface level way. Okay. So Like, I touched up some bits and pieces, added some more details.
So the photos that we see of that now are pretty much that original. All right, that's amazing.
They are the original piece. So the Sister of Battle armor is that original costume. It has so all the stuff like the small metal fleur-de-lis on it and stuff like that are all new. Those weren't there before. But in its basic form, it's the same, and it's lumpy and bumpy and non-symmetrical and falling apart. And I can't actually wear it to conventions anymore. It's falling apart too much. Sure. I do have plans for what I want to do with it,
right?
But I guess I don't have to keep them secret. I plan on turning it into a set of Nurgle, like a Nurgle corrupted Sister of Battle.
Okay.
Because that way I can. So I don't really like how wasteful a lot of cosplay is. It's hard to do it as an activity without ending up producing a lot of waste. And throwing away a whole costume would be a real shame. But it's not in good enough nick to use, and I wouldn't be comfortable selling it or even giving it away because, again, it's just not in good condition. But if I turn it into a Nurgle one, then everything that's lumpy and bumpy and damaged over the years doesn't matter because that will look perfect. So just, doing a whole bunch of conversion work to it and then a new paint job on it at some point. Yeah. It's in the queue along with a million other projects.
Yeah, add it to the list, absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I'm really surprised at that because for a first project and for that long ago and the way you did it, it seems to have held up really well. Like
I say, there were two of us and we did spend 3 months on it. It wasn't a quick build. It was cheap but not fast.
Yes.
It's not very sturdy anymore. But for photo shoots you can just about get away with it.
Yeah. Well, was it they say you can have two of fast, cheap and good.
Yeah.
But you can't have all three. So
exactly.
But sometimes, particularly for a first go at it, I think. I'd be reticent. We talked very briefly offline, and I've mentioned before that I'm considering a cosplay, and I'm reticent to go and spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds or something that I might not be that into.
Yeah, it is a whole new activity. And along with that comes, as with all of these hobbies, a whole set of kind of tools and equipment and skills that you end up picking up along the way. But with cosplay, I would definitely say it's, as you say, like time, cost and quality, or I think sometimes time, cost and skill. Like you can do a lot more, the more, like as your skills increase, the more flexibility you have inside both budget and time. But certainly for your first cosplay, I would think about not rushing it. Yeah. Because that will allow you to, build slower and kind of think more creatively about where you can find stuff from. So for example, if you need certain things that are kind of textile based, you can often either find similar things, and if you're not in a rush, then you can be charity shopping and secondhand shopping and those kind of things, which will cut your costs way down. And I have actually done charity shopping for fabrics as well before. So for like my Katarchan Jungle Fighter, where they've got the red bands for their pieces, that's actually just red t-shirt that I got from a charity shop. Sure. And the same as all the strapping on that gun that's olive green is also a t-shirt that I got from a charity shop. Because again, with the environmental side of cosplay, anything you can do to counterbalance that is a good thing. So getting stuff secondhand where you're not having fresh textiles made for things is a good thing when you can do it. It's not always practical.
Yeah, absolutely. So you find yourself when you're planning something, looking at charity shops or car boots, things like that for finding those useful things.
It's always dependent on the exact costume you're making as well and what you need. So, for example, I've got a Lady Alinda video shoot that I'm in progress of planning at the moment. And for that, I needed... So, originally, the main dress does have a lot of charity shop stuff. So, old wedding dresses in it.
Right, yeah.
But what I need for the video shoot is some really long lengths of a very specific fabric. So, when I need a 35 metre length of a of one type of fabric, that is not going to be something that you can pull out of garments in the charity shop, so that I have had to buy. But it's different for each project and for each thing that you're looking for, really.
Do you spend a lot of time in that initial stage where you're looking at what you're doing, trying to work out where those pieces are coming from?
Yeah, a lot of the early stages of cosplay are not very exciting. They're not the bit that people expect, where you're kind of up to your elbows in paint and glue and fabric. You're kind of more like, you're looking at the design of the character, you're breaking it down into effectively making a garment list and a prop list, kind of going, even as simple as like, I need socks and trousers and boots, and kind of making yourself that tick list so that you can then look at each individual item and kind of think where they can come from. I try and buy and modify more than make from scratch if I don't have to. So although I am a seamstress, I've done a lot of that professionally over the years, I could make all the textiles parts myself. It's not always efficient. Like, say you need to buy a shirt, it's way less efficient for me to buy fabric and like make pattern cut and make a shirt, when I could literally just go and buy one from either a charity shop or whatever. So like the Krieg cosplay that I'm doing at the moment, I could tailor clothes, or I could buy vintage military stuff. Which is far faster, means I can produce more projects, and also like it looks good and it's easier for me. So I try and do that for the things where you can find something that exists, and then only scratch build the things that I can't find somewhere else.
There's an effort to effect kind of ratio, and you need to decide where you're going to be on that with each item. Okay.
And, cost comes in as well there. Yeah, so you could do things a lot cheaper than I'm doing. So like for my Krieg one, I'm really going to town on it. I haven't really done cosplay this year, particularly with all the lockdown stuff that's been happening and just everything that's been going on with life. And this is actually the first new cosplay that I'm building this year. So I'm sinking a lot of resources into it, especially because it's part of my job now. So I can actually do that, which if you're a hobbyist, that's not necessarily an option. So it's always about what's right for the particular person and what's right for the particular project.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you've got experience in seamstressing, which not in a Terry Pratchett way, but that's from previous work and things like that. Is that you had those skills before?
Yeah. So when I stopped Warhammering, which was when I graduated. It was actually when I went into third year of university, which was unrelated. It was a history degree. But I actually, after I graduated, moved into circus as a career. So I've been a professional circus artist and performer for the last 10 years. And I don't do like traveling big top work. I do basically like high-end costumed walkabout for luxury events. And so I've been running or co-running a company inside that industry, and I've been in charge of costume design and creation. So across those 10 years, I've been, producing professional costumes in that industry, and then also done odds and sods in like theatre and repairs and alterations and just various bits and pieces over the years, which kind of, you just end up knowing a bunch of stuff. On the one hand, I kind of had done a costume degree. On the other hand, I've picked up a whole bunch of things that are quite useful, so I get by with what I've got. Sure,
yeah. Like most, most builders can also do a little bit of plumbing and a little bit of everything else. Similar thing for you, where you kind of have to absorb a lot of different skills. Were there any kind of skills that when you started this, you really had to learn from scratch?
All of it, really.
Okay.
So when I first started costuming at all, I was doing GCSE textiles, but there wasn't actually a teacher at my school. I was the only person doing it. They let me sit the course, but I had to self-teach everything. and just go through it that way. So I was self-teaching sewing while I was at school, and then once I did cosplay, you just pick stuff up like in a really informal way, but just kind of, you know, when you need to make something, you just experiment and keep doing that process of iteration where you make a lot of mistakes. Like I've made a lot of crap over the years. Terrible art and terrible costuming when in the early years, and I think that's super important. I think nowadays when people talk about starting cosplay or starting something, sometimes they're quite worried about making something bad. Like they kind of don't want to start because they don't want to make something that doesn't look good. But I think it's a super important part of the process that you just make stuff that's rubbish and you just learn from that, and you just keep going with it, and you give yourself that space, because if you don't give yourself that space to produce things that aren't good or aren't high quality, then you're not giving yourself that space to learn and to make mistakes and to actually have a deeper understanding of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a thing in life that a lot of, it's not being lost per se, but it's something that's not necessarily taught. It's not that you learn more by doing these things, but you do learn by that just the process, whether the result's there or not.
Yeah. And I think on social media, I do understand why that is harder for people, because like when I was making all my first rubbish things, you know, I was just kind of doing that at school and with friends, and we had Facebook, but we put everything on Facebook, but it was just our mates, you know, it wasn't like, whereas now people kind of think of it as like, if they start cosplay, then they're going to post it on their Instagram and it's going to be public to the whole world. And so, yeah, I get that you wouldn't want to make a mistake if you're planning on posting it publicly online. You kind of need that privacy of just making mistakes on your own without it being a public thing where you're going to be judged on it. Because there can be some quite toxic culture online. I think we've all seen, you know, you get it on some of the Facebook groups and things like that for Warhammer, where you'll get someone post their first miniatures and then there's always someone in the comments being like, oh, it's crap. Like, there's always those people who are going to not give that space for people to begin things, and it can be quite off-putting. So I think it's important that we create a culture, especially around hobby and creative hobbies, where people are able to fail and to do things in a way that isn't amazing, because it's all part of that process and that learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are big proponent of helping to create that. That's cool. Have you ever thought of that kind of thing? That kind of approach to answering people's comments and things like that. I will say it's an interesting thing you said there, that you just like, I just kind of learn by doing things. I do think there are certain mindsets that are better at that than others. Sometimes definitely. I will look at something and go, can't do that, just because that's what my brain works. Is like, I need to know how to do it a little bit more. So I mean,
it's definitely different.
Yeah.
And conversely, like, the thing that I'm bad at is actually I'm terrible at researching how to do things before I do them. I don't look at tutorials. Like, I came back into miniature painting, and honestly, I haven't watched or looked at a single tutorial ever on painting. Like, I don't know why. It's really stupid, because I'll be like, oh, my rust is rubbish. But instead of, you know, Googling it, where there's then hundreds of tutorials and hundreds of things that other people have done, I will just experiment and make stuff up. And on the one hand, it's good because you end up with your own, like, you have a very unique style. Like, people can really recognize my painting style as mine because it doesn't look like anything else. On the other hand, it's really slow compared to just looking at a tutorial. So I actually do wish I was more like that. But as you say, I think you're wired in a certain way and you kind of work in a certain way.
And we will always look at the other people who do it the other way. And I try and paint between the lines. You know, that's my painting style, because I'm limited ability. And I will look at the people who will just go off and do stuff. And I like, John Blanche for me. The fact that he can paint his models the way he paints his stuff for 40k just blows my mind. It just completely scrambles my head because I'm like, no, just doesn't
thinking
work.
of it in the same way. That's the thing. I think sometimes when people, it's almost like it's how you think about the painting of the miniature. Like I'm guessing that he's just seeing the miniature as art, which is why he'll then paint it the same way. So like, I definitely find that because so technically I did miniature painting first, but that was like when I was a kind of kid and teenager. In terms of when I actually went through that whole adult process of developing as an artist, like all across my 20s, that was all on costuming. And so I paint miniatures as though they're costumes. So when I'm looking at miniatures, I'm kind of imagining what those characters would be like if you were costuming them, if they were real, like, and full size. So that's probably why my style looks different, because I'm not thinking of it as how do I paint this miniature, where there is, there's a certain kind of style and a norm, mainly led by Games Workshop, but then also like influenced by the communities that form as well. So if you kind of think of it as painting a miniature, how do I paint a miniature? And then you Google that, you will get a certain approach, which is a good approach, like it looks nice, but it will give you one approach. Whereas if you look at a miniature and you go, how do I costume this miniature? Or how do I make art using this miniature? Or whatever your particular other interest is, then you end up with something quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. And luckily we get to experience a whole variety of the ways of painting models from all these different people. We live talk about the golden age of wargaming. All you'd have to do is click on Instagram and you can see people from all around the world painting in completely different styles. You can see the same model 15 times and they don't look remotely alike.
And then you can chat to people as well. Like that's the thing that's so amazing about the community. And there's so many incredible professional painters who have Patreons and stuff for their tutorials now. So you really can get effectively into the workshop of people who are, Golden Demon winners. Whereas when I was a kid and I saw Golden Demon winners, you'd see them in the cases at Games Day, and then you'd see them in the supplements that came with White Dwarf, where it would kind of just have a little fold out with all the Golden Demon winners in it, or like you'd have a pamphlet at the thing or whatever. But you'd see that art, but you'd never see the people behind it. You'd see them obviously walk on stage to collect their trophy, but in terms of the idea that you can actually follow what they're doing in their painting, you can see their style evolving over time and go back and look at their past work. You can see tutorials and videos of them explaining what they're doing, and you can message them and kind of, book one-on-one sessions if you want to. It's just incredible.
It is. And as you say, like, although some of these people have Patreons, you can still just message them. And a lot of the time there is a lot of two-way communication. I'm very lucky. My old host won the Slayer's Sword at the Heresy Weekender 3 years ago, something like that. And so through him, I started to get onto kind of knowing a lot of the painters. I went to one of the winners' days and things like that. And just even sitting in a room, listening to them chat, it did affect my painting. And most of it, I was like, that's really cool. I'm not going to try that, but that's really cool. and sometimes I can give advice to people about their painting, even though I am kind of well below their standard, because I know the principles.
That's the thing they say about tennis coaching and a lot of coaching, isn't it? That, it's not that the coach is necessarily better than the player. It is a different skill. Being good at teaching and being good at coaching is different from being good at the actual activity itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much cool stuff, as you say, online and everything else. So you've gone from this sister battle that you've made over 3 months with all the different parts. Roughly how many costumes do you think you've done in that time? Or do you know them all?
I mean, it's a tricky one as well, because it depends on what you count.
Sure.
I'm assuming you're meaning Warhammer cosplays. I'm not going to even begin to count what I've done in terms of.
I mean, I don't mind either way. I mean, Yeah, we
No, I
focus
don't.
on Warhammer. We focus on Warhammer, but we also, if there's anything you want to pull in from other places.
Yeah, well, I've kind of cosplayed quite a lot because I do a shoot a month on my Patreon.
Yeah.
So there's different ones I've done, but then some of them I wouldn't count as like they're not a cosplay.
Yeah.
Like they're not a finished costume. They're kind of, it's the equivalent of, I guess, doing a finished piece of art, like a finished drawing or painting versus a rough sketch. So like there's quite a few that I would classify as kind of very rough sketches of characters rather than finished cosplays. But I guess 10-ish.
Okay.
10-ish. But in terms of ones I like, not that many. Yeah. They tend to be slower builds, the ones that I actually like.
That's fair enough. So moving on from, you said, you wouldn't make a costume the way you made it for that first one. Did you quickly move on to finding the right materials, in inverted commas, and the more more appropriate materials for what you're doing? How did you finding out that information and learning how to use those? A lot of trial and error, obviously.
Yeah, well, actually, I did my Sister of Battle armor, which was in 2009, and then that was actually that was the last big thing I did. I then went into like the final stages of uni, which you just, you're not really doing anything else. And then I graduated, and it was only a couple months before I set up my first business and was working full time on that.
Sure.
And, life happened for 8 years. And during that time, I was doing a huge amount of costuming, but it was very different. So cosplay you tend to find involves a lot of different skills from normal sewing and costuming, because it tends to be very heavy on armor, props, weaponry, unusual materials, whereas a lot of other stuff is more textile based. So I was very specialized in terms of like my costuming expertise is sort of like costuming for fire performance, costuming for trapeze. I did a lot of underwater costuming, like mermaid tails for ocean swimming, that kind of thing. So very specialist stuff, but all textile based. Whereas when I then came back to cosplay, I was going more into those new materials like foam armors and that kind of thing, which is quite different and something that I am very much still learning. Like I would say I'm very early stage with my foam work. It's quite improvised. I did a very, very good course this January. Yeah, it must be this January, with a company called Artifakes.
Yeah. And
they're fantastic. They're so good. So I learned almost everything I know about foam making now is learnt from that course, combined with winging it.
Sure.
So if you can do a course, then that's a really good way of doing it. There are also a lot of ebooks and tutorials, but like I say, like I'm so bad at actually just sitting down and looking at tutorials. I just don't do it. Whereas I love courses. Like if there's a teacher and a structured learning environment, I love it.
Yeah.
If it's me on my own in my room, I will like buy an ebook about it and then literally never read it. Yeah,
I think
not even Google it.
For the vast majority of people, there's that advantage of having the stuff in your hands or being able to see how someone's working it.
Yeah.
And ask them questions there and then. And learning off YouTube and all that is wonderful, but being on a course where it's dedicated, there are X amount of people watching and you're being taught is always going to be more valuable. For
exactly.
Most people.
Like, and it's that very much, it's the feedback, isn't it? That as you're building something, you've got someone watching you and going, okay, and now just slightly move that hand here and do this, and you can't get that in another way than having a teacher.
It's amazing how with painting as well, just those subtle changes to what you're doing all of a sudden make things click in, and and it's almost impossible to do it in any other format. Apart from just trial and error. But then, as you say, some of these foams and things are quite expensive. So
yeah, and you can get cheaper crafting foams and stuff. So what you can do is effectively the same way. So with fabric, you can you'd experiment with patterns and kind of figure everything out on a cheaper fabric before then transferring that finished pattern onto your more expensive fabric. You can do the same in foam. So you have like cheaper craft foams that you would pattern cut on and then transfer it onto the finished foam. But I mean, you're probably still going to have a bit of trial and error and kind of finishing off work to do there.
Yeah, I could just imagine me doing something like that, doing it on the cheap stuff, transferring it over, then just being stupid and ruining everything in one fell swoop.
Also it's quite different. It can be different foam, so like the cheap stuff is not going to move and respond in exactly the same way necessarily as the other foams that you're going to be using. So you kind of need to be able to predict that difference.
Sure.
Which only really comes from experience.
Yeah, and I mean, as with everything here, practice and 10,000 hours and all that to be an expert is experience and practice are invaluable tools. So I realised after finding you on Instagram that I saw you at Warhammer Fest last year.
Awesome.
was it last year or the year before?
It was last year.
It was last year. Again, with everything going on, time has travelled in weird ways. In your Mechanicum,
the Tech Priestess.
Tech Priestess, quite an involved costume, quite a largish costume. Not necessarily the largest, but you took up some space.
Yeah, I'm actually as tall as the stilt guys, but only with my saw.
Sure. And there's with the nature of being Mechanicum, things sticking off you as well.
Yeah, they're a nightmare.
How comfortable is that costume for you?
Very uncomfortable.
It is.
Yeah, so it's very, very warm. So all the robes are like thick felt in order to make them fall correctly, like to give them the stiffness that you need for the lower silhouette. Because there's quite a lot going on the top with Mechanicus, especially if you've got a large servo harness, a lot of mechadendrites, which is the tentacly things. Then, you can't just have tiny little column skirt at the bottom. You need a bit of volume.
Yeah.
So that's quite stiff fabric, which is then very, very toasty. And then what people, I think, before they get into cosplay don't always realise is that foam is really warm. Yeah. Like, you think you would lie on quite a thin camping roll mat in order to insulate you from the ground overnight. So if you encase your entire body in that, then and then walk around a warm convention hall exercising and sweating, then you get pretty toasty. So the foam is warm, and then all the large harness with all the mechadendrites on it is very, very heavy. There's actually a lot of steel bar in that to keep them in place. Right. So all the outer parts of them are not heavy, but the steel bar like framework inside it is super heavy. And then I've got a hood and then a respirator covering the entire lower half of my face and a mask that covers one of my eyes. So my like seeing patch is kind of, palm sized really.
Sure, yeah.
And having one eye really disorientates you. It means that you don't have proper depth perception. Yeah. And your eye gets quite strained from trying to take on all the pressure for the day. So it tends to be pretty uncomfy. But I love it. It's my favourite costume, so I wear it anyway.
And I'm guessing that you're only really wearing these in places, apart from maybe a shoot, but when you're going to a convention or something like that, there's lots of people at a convention. So not only are you less able to judge distances, and you're taking up more room than you normally would do, and it's weird how used we are to our own bodies. Yeah. And when you suddenly put an extra bit of width on, all of a sudden you're like, how am I hitting stuff?
Yeah, I do have a big advantage in that from having worked in circus for so long that I'm used to having strange extensions on my body. So like I'm a professional stilt walker.
Right.
So you kind of I'm used to being different heights.
Yeah.
I'm used to being different widths. I'm used to like either having large headdresses or very, very wide costumes or a mermaid tail or whatever it is. That means that my like the amount of space that I take up is different. So I'm used to like judging doorways and ceilings and all of that depending on what I'm wearing. So I have,
That's handy.
That is a transferable skill, I guess, that goes from circus to cosplay.
But I think it's possibly something that we should remember as well as people at conventions is, you know, that Space Marine walking around is not used to the silhouette that they're wearing. And as such, give them a little bit of extra space and maybe a little bit of extra time as well.
Also they can't necessarily see you.
Yeah.
So like it's a bit like being up too close to the back of a lorry. Like if you're stood right in front of them, they can't necessarily see you depending on like how their helmet eye slits are and all of that kind of thing. Like it is possible for you to effectively get into a blind spot. One thing with that though is that pretty much anyone wearing a big costume will have at least one spotter with them who is working with them to assist them. So like in the Tech Priestess I have two. I have one on each side, just making sure that I don't take out people or at one point I tried to take out a Titan, like one of the new display Titans at Warhammer Fest, and luckily got stopped from doing that.
I was going to ask about that. Having those people around to help out.
They're heroes. They're the absolute heroes of cosplay. You'll always hear cosplayers going on about their spotters.
Sure.
Like do you know Iron Warrior cosplay, Dovrig?
Yeah, I know of him. Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah. So if any time you interview him or talk to him, then he always he just praises Harry constantly, who is his main spotter for events, because without that person it's you can't go out into a convention if it's not safe to do so. So if you don't have that spotter with you, then you can't really go out and do your thing, and it's quite a big it's a really nice thing that they do to help out, because actually if you're there assisting someone and making sure that they're not hitting anything and all of this kind of thing, then you're not out and about for that period of time doing anything else at the convention. So you are really giving your time to allow someone to do that activity that they love so much. So shout out to the spotters.
They're rarely in the photos, but they're there.
They tend to subtly move out the way for photos, but they will be straight back in there the moment they're needed.
That's awesome. So your Mechanicus costume, how easy was that to eat and drink?
I mean, I've got reasonable mobility in terms of my arms and stuff, but I'm in a respirator, so I have to move that out the way, which tends to be, so I tend to do that behind the scenes, because you're very hot and sweaty under it, and paint comes off on your face and all this kind of thing, so I tend to look rough. Also, I only do one eye of makeup in the Tech Priestess.
Sure, okay, so that would look
the other one's
strange.
under an eyepiece, so I look hella weird. I only do makeup on 1/4 of my face for that at photo shoots. It's very odd looking.
So again, that's where your spotter is helping you out as well.
They're very useful for that, because also you tend to find the kind of people who make good spotters are also the kind of people who care. So they tend to be have you drunk enough water? Have you eaten recently? You've skipped lunch, which really helps, because when you're in the zone and you're having a great time, and what you tend to find as well is you're constantly stopped for photos, you're constantly stopped for chats, which is lovely and really enjoyable, but it's super easy to lose track of time and then to kind of realize that you haven't drunk water for a couple of hours, or it's 4 p.m. and you haven't had lunch, which when you burn a lot of energy actually when you're cosplaying at conventions, between the heat and the movement and I think you're doing a lot of mental work as well. Your brain is really firing a lot, because as we've said, you're kind of keeping track of a lot of stuff around you, at the same time as scanning for where you want to pose for cameras, and kind of making sure that you're actually seeing and acknowledging when people come up to talk to you, because sometimes it's quite hard, especially if someone's hovering on the edge and trying to be polite. Like, I would much rather people like run up to me and say hello, because if they're kind of hovering and almost waiting for permission to come and say hello, then I won't necessarily see them if I'm in that kind of costume where I don't have good visibility, or when I'm like distracted by all the stuff that I'm wearing. So it's nice when people come up and say hi.
Sure. So moving on to that. So if I'm at a convention and I see someone wearing something cool and I just want to talk to them or maybe get a photo, be kind of forward about it. Like you're saying, not too forwards, obviously, but
well, I would say it's just awareness. So one thing that you do get as a cosplayer is that sometimes people will try and take a photo of you at a really bad time. So like, if someone is sitting down and eating their lunch, don't take a picture of them, especially if someone's got half their costume off, or they're changing, or someone is like helping them adjust something, or like they're swigging from a water bottle. Like, it's kind of the equivalent of just walking up to someone while they're just eating their breakfast or like on the loo and just taking a picture of them without permission. It's a bit invasive.
Sure.
But if someone is fully costumed up, they're not currently eating or drinking, and they're kind of like out and about in the event, then I would say like walk up to people and say hi is totally fine, definitely, because if you're cosplaying, then you're very much expecting that, and also a lot of the time enjoying that. Like, you've put a lot of effort and time and like money and skill and heart and soul and often blood, sweat and tears into building this thing. So having people come up, especially people who understand what you are,
right?
Because that's the thing. Like, a lot, like you can build your Mechanicus and it's big, and at cosplay conventions, people think it's cool because it's like big and fancy. But that's not the same as at Warhammer conventions and things where people come up and they know what character you are, and they get it, and they get the background, and they're like involved, and that's super cool. It's really cool to have that feedback, and it's a lot of what's so fun about cosplay. So I think giving that kind of feedback and enthusiasm to people is really, really good. It's just remembering that people are human, really. Yeah. Like being aware of if they're in a situation where it would be invasive to take a photo or talk to someone, but if not, then just being friendly and polite. Like, obviously don't make physical contact with someone unless you kind of have their permission. Like, don't walk up and touch stuff on people's costume or them without first checking with them. But other than that, which I think it's just normal, but sometimes people forget. They see the costume and they forget that it's just a person. You're
an attraction.
Yeah.
There for them. Yeah. I do kind of. You can see how people. Well, you can see how some people get confused with that. Other people, there's obviously. There's something more than that, but
and it's in the excitement as well. Like, it's easy to get overexcited and be like, "Oh my god, that's amazing!" Especially if something's very tactile, like it looks like you really want to touch it. Like, that's cool, but
and it's something you put a lot of work in. I'd be mortified if I reached out and grabbed a mechadendrite and it came off in my hand, because the amount of work that you put in.
It's not necessarily. I mean, people try. It's theoretically safe for you, but you don't. Yeah. You don't know which bits are like okay to touch in terms of like yourself as well.
Yeah, there's a whole myriad of reasons not to touch cosplayers. Yeah. So we just stay away from touching.
Don't touch cosplayers, but do say hello.
Yeah, exactly. And when you talked about taking photos and stuff, it's almost if you're in full costume standing around, then you're. If you've gone to a convention, you're on the understanding that if you are in full costume, then you're on work, and so it would be expected within reason, obviously.
Yeah. So if you want to take a picture with a cosplayer, then I would say it's really good to ask, because firstly, it shows respect for them as a person, which is really good, obviously on a lot of different levels, but also in terms of the picture that you're actually going to get. Like, if you just see someone and you're like, oh, that's cool, and you snap a picture and they're kind of facing sideways and chatting to someone else, and maybe their prop is not held properly, then, you know, it's a bit lame. And then as a cosplayer, you've put all that effort in. You want pictures to be going online that really show off what you've made as best as possible. So generally, if you ask a cosplayer for a picture, you'll get a much better picture because they'll turn and face you and they'll do a cool pose and they'll like make sure all their costume is in place and all that kind of thing. So like you get a cooler picture of the thing that you thought was cool. And it means also for them that what's going online is then it's their actual costume rather than, I guess it's the same as like you wouldn't like it if you were chatting to someone and someone just took a picture of you while you were not posed and were just kind of like in the middle of something else. And it was kind of that like, you know, really rough picture, and then they stuck it publicly on the internet and tagged you in it. And it's exactly the same with cosplay. Like give that person, firstly, give them the opportunity to consent and say whether it's a good time for them and whether they're comfortable. And also then giving that person the opportunity to help you make that picture as good as possible so that it just works better for both of you.
Yeah, I think both those points, because there are people who will do it because they don't have respect, and there are people who would do it because they don't want to bother people, and that's a really tough one. Sometimes I can be a little bit like, I'll just leave them. They, you know, they get enough hassle through the day. I
would say with that, so like if you're going to be a not respect person, then there's nothing I can say to help you. But if you don't want to bother people, then I would say if you are going to take a soul picture like that, don't put it online. Yeah. Like if you want it for your own memory, keep it for your own memory, but don't put it on the internet. And also remember that you're not bothering someone, you're part of their experience. Like part of going to a convention in cosplay is meeting people who are enthusiastic about what you're doing, and it's meeting people who love the same stuff that you love and who appreciate the time and effort that you've put into work. So like that's not bothersome. Like having someone come up and say, can I take a picture, is complimentary.
Sure.
Like it's really, really nice. And I do understand as well that like especially in our community we have quite a lot of introverts. I probably don't seem like it, but I actually am one and have a lot of social anxiety. So I do really understand that, you know, going up to a stranger, especially if they're a stranger that, you know, you've seen their work online, and, you know, there's this weird thing around where when people have a lot of followers, it's kind of like, ooh, celebrity status. But they're just a person. I do understand that, you know, like, if you have anxiety or are very shy, then that can be quite intimidating. There's, you know, generally cosplayers will be friendly back to you. Yeah. And if they're not, then it probably means something like they've got a headache, or, you know, like they're at the end of their kind of cosplay time and they really need to go off and take a break now, which can happen with people sometimes. So if someone is a bit short with you, it probably isn't you. It probably is like, you know, their costume is uncomfortable and they need to go have lunch.
Sure. Or they're an introvert and they need some time to recharge.
Yeah, that can really be a thing. Like, I absolutely love chatting with people at conventions. It's a lot of why I go. It's just being able to meet the people that, like, online is nice, but it's so much cooler being able to meet people in person. There's nothing I love more than when people come up and are like, hi, I follow you on Instagram, like, chat about hobby stuff. It's great, but there is definitely that point in the day where, like, your brain just gets really overloaded and you need, like, I always go and take my costume off at that point.
Sure.
But depending on what event you're at and what setup you've got, sometimes people don't have that option. Like, they don't have somewhere to go take that off. Like, they would have to actually go home or go back to their hotel and kind of be done for the day. So people do sometimes try and, like, muscle through and stick it out, which you know, can be a bit tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. So at these events, how much, obviously, you said you've got the background with the performing.
Yeah.
How much does that really help you, that performing aspect, when you're out in costume?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it means that all of it's automatic. So because a lot of the job that I've done is less stage shows and more roaming entertainment costumed walkabout. That is so cosplaying at a convention is super similar to what I do for work normally. Yeah. In fact, it's so similar to what I do for work that, that I have to be quite careful.
Yeah.
Quite careful about like just making sure that I maintain it as a hobby and not switch into that work mode and make sure that I'm actually enjoying it. So yeah, it's very similar in a lot of ways, because a lot of what you're doing, you're paying attention to your costume, you're paying attention to your posture and your mannerisms if you're doing something that's in character, and you're also paying a lot of attention to your periphery and to where people are, where cameras are facing you, where people are facing you. If there is someone who's nervous standing on the edge who looks like they want to come and say hello but are too shy, like it's that kind of thing that you're spotting for and trying to not miss those things. There's quite a lot of demands on your attention.
Do you have any kind of tips to help? So I'm always jealous of Carl Tuttle from the Independent Characters, who's one of those people who can see someone who he sees someone recognise him and approaches them and makes it really easy for them to say hi. You know, I listen to the show, and I am terrible at that. Do you have any kind of tips to help that to help people who are less comfortable with that side of things if they choose to cosplay?
It depends where the issue is. So, is it that you're finding it hard to notice when that's happening, or is it that you kind of notice it, but then you second guess yourself?
For me, it would be a little bit of second guessing and a little bit of, not wanting to be the guy who, although I know it's not that way, not wanting to be the guy who goes over and goes, "Hi, I'm Greg from the Imperial Truth." You know, and not saying that other people do that, but that's how it would feel if I were to do it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, feeling like that's almost like an imposter syndrome of not wanting to. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would think of it. I would say thinking of it as there's this weird thing online where it's like a fan and a creator, but I think it's more just like we're just nerds. It's literally just, hello nerd, I am also nerd. And so kind of approaching people on that level, less thinking about talking to a fan of the show, and more being like, oh, I'm going to go say hi to that person because they look curious. And if they turn out to not know you, then it doesn't matter at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you've approached them as a fan of the show and they turn out to not be a fan of the show, then that's going to be quite anxious for you and quite oh, that's embarrassing. But if you just approach them just not hi, I'm Greg from the Imperial Truth, but more just hey, how you doing? Yeah. Have you been to this event before? Think of it more as finding out about them. And then they will, at that point, if they are a fan of the show and they've recognised you, they will be oh, hey.
Yeah. Creates the opportunity for them.
Yeah. And actually, I had that. That's actually how I've made a really good friend. So, a really, really good friend of mine, probably one of the best friends I've made from Warhammer, actually, is we were at Warhammer World and we were standing by the same case. And we just kind of, I wasn't really sure if he'd recognise me or not recognise me. Yeah. So we just kind of struck up conversation about the models in the case and just what was going on, as in just a normal conversation between two nerds about the stuff in the case and what the event was and what we were doing there and that kind of thing. And then he then said oh, I know your stuff from blah, 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 blah. And that kind of, just having that really normal introduction means that also it's totally flexible, because at that point, if you've kind of been too alert and the person actually doesn't recognize you, they were actually looking at you because there's spinach in your teeth or whatever it is, or you're weird looking, so they're just staring, then you haven't kind of like gone out on a limb with anything. You've just kind of said hello to someone and had a really normal conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I
which
think
is less scary.
Yeah, and still, you know, as I say, I think it's again, it's a skill that some people need to practice. Talking to randoms, yeah.
It is hard, and like I think the most important thing I would say with that is giving yourself, like being gentle with yourself, giving yourself that space to be like, you know, that is difficult. Approaching someone that you don't know, who may or may not know various things about you and you have no idea, like that, especially if you're an introvert and especially if you're not used to doing that, like that is hard. And I do still find that hard. I'm used to doing it for work, for performance work, but there's context. Like when you're clearly dressed up providing entertainment at an event, you can strike up a conversation with anyone because there's clearly, like, the reason that you're doing it is clear. Whereas when you're in civilian clothes, then, and you're not kind of contextually recognized as part of the event, then, you know, that becomes more of a social anxiety thing where, you know, you are making the first approach to a new person. And personally, I find that very difficult. Although I'm used to doing it at work and in costume and in context, when you put me in my own civilian clothes in a room full of people, I will absolutely not introduce myself to a single person. I am terrible. It's why it's so great, and I love it so much and really appreciate it when people come up and introduce themselves to me, because they've done the hard part.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, like, I get to actually just chat with them, which is really, really nice.
That's cool.
So just being gentle with yourself, really.
Yeah, there's something we can all do a little bit more, I feel.
Definitely.
Excellent. Well, that's been really interesting conversation. Hope you've enjoyed being on.
So.
And let's say you've got your most kind of busy on Instagram.
Yeah.
That's, what's your Instagram name again?
It's nerd__princess. But to be honest, if you Google nerd princess, you will find me. So
there we go. I'll put links in the show notes, and you do use other social media platforms.
Loosely.
And everything.
Yeah, I exist on them, but I don't really post much.
There's a tweet every now and then.
Yeah, like a tweet once a blue moon and like a YouTube video once a year kind of thing.
So,
although I plan on doing more.
That's cool. And if people want to go look back through your photos on Instagram, they'll see a load of your cosplay.
Yeah, lots of cosplay, lots of miniatures as well.
Yeah, and I will say as well, your miniatures, your creativity with conversions and scratch building was quite cool. I was quite surprised to see your winged demon thing.
That was the first scratch build I did.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty awesome. If that's the first one.
I did it for a challenge that a friend of mine was running, just for fun, because I wasn't feeling creative and I needed something pointless to do, for the fun of it rather than for any purpose. And so I built that weird thing. It's not even in anything. It's not game legal.
You know, it's game legal. It depends on what table you're playing on, as far as I'm concerned. So, you can go and check you all out there, and all your hobbying. I mean, there's quite busy as well with the stories. You're quite the Instagrammer. I'm terrible on Instagram. Absolutely terrible. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, Frankie.
Thank you. And if you ever want to chat through your cosplay stuff, then just give me a shout.
Oh, that's a dangerous thing to say. Okay, wonderful. Cheers.
All right.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of The Imperial Truth. If you do have any feedback, you want to get hold of the show, greg@theimperialtruth.com, or you can reply about the specific show on the Facebook page, or you can go to Twitter @imperial_truth, at Child of Fang for my personal one as well. And you can give feedback about this episode, about previous episodes. You can give ideas about what to cover. You can ask questions. Please feel free to ask questions we can talk about on the show. I'll do another Q&A at some point soon and gather some questions together. I was just about to say then we could talk about events as well, but we're still in a really weird place with events. I get the feeling I'll get our next kind of wave of confirmed cancellations coming up soon as well. The problem with big events is the money has to be paid up front. So as we sit here towards the end of October, I'm expecting Adepticon not to happen in March because of, as I say, being able to spend the money needed to hire the space is a huge risk when we have no idea what the situation will be then, whether it's allowed to have that many people in a certain space. And unfortunately, these events do need to reach a certain amount to break even. It should have been at Company of Legends. It's not happening. It's a really sad kind of time. We've got Bugman's open now. I must admit, Warhammer World itself, you can go and play games in. From the picture, there look to be about 10 tables in the whole of Bugman's, the whole of Warhammer World. Bugman's is allotted time slots, essentially. You have to book in, I think, and you have a limited time so that you don't take up all the space, which is completely understandable. I've had a day off the other day, and I was severely tempted to drive all the way to Nottingham just to go to Bugman's. I miss the place, and I miss what Bugman's represents to me, which is being among friends. And I do a bit of that around here, but I've got so many friends who don't live anywhere near me. You really miss it. Maybe it's something down the line that I organise a get together up in Nottingham, even if we don't play games, but we go and have a meal and whatever. There is, it all depends on the situation as well. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where pre-planning anything at the moment becomes a real pain. Mrs. and I were looking at going away for a weekend in a couple of weeks, and our original destination is basically won't allow us in at the moment. So we might have a very local kind of maybe go and stay somewhere, but not booking anything up until the day means, as I say, I don't think we're going to get any events happening for a while. Not events in the way that I mean, where you go and stay for a weekend. I know 40k. A few local 40k events that have been happening, but no one really stays on site for those. I think they're doing their first 2-day one down in Kent. I think it's called Kent 40k, but that's people travelling each day for that, so it's understandable. And little one dayers, you can get away with it if you don't mind wearing a mask all day. It's not my ideal circumstance. If you're competitive and there's competitive gaming, I understand it, and I am tempted to go along and try it out. But for me, I'm at these events to go and talk to people, and it's less easy under the current circumstances. But people are doing what they do, and it's offering that relief. Then it's all good. But yeah, fingers crossed we move through that. So I know we're supposed to be at Blood and Glory. Start of next month, or no, soon. But obviously that's it was the first weekend in November. Next year, hopefully we'll all be completely sorted by then. But I'm not putting out any announcements. I've got an idea for an event to do, but it's just not worth looking at the moment when I've got other stuff that is going to be taking my time, which I'm, procrastinating from doing other jobs, as they say. But anyway, it almost feels like that's becoming too much of a common warble from me talking about the current situation, but it's real and it's happening. But yeah, if you've got any feedback, if you want to support the show, Element Games and Geek Shield, and we also have t-shirts. You can find the links in the show notes, and a Patreon as well. many thanks for anyone who does do any of that. And many thanks for you just for listening, frankly. It's always nice to hear when people say they've enjoyed the show. And on that note, I think I will leave it there. Until next time, you have been listening to The Imperial Truth.